Manager at the State Coastal Conservancy, and I'm here with my colleagues, Cherie and Vanessa, who can introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Axon. I'm a project manager in our San Francisco Bay program.
And I'm Cherie Erickson. I'm also a project manager in our San Francisco Bay program. And also, whenever we started recording, it automatically turns off everybody's mics and cameras. So just a warning, that did happen to everyone. So all your cameras got turned off just now when we started the recording. So if you want them on, you have to turn them back on.
Great. All right. Sorry. Our slideshow, getting our slideshow going. Great. Can you all see the slides?
I see some head nods. Yes.
Good. Okay. Okay, welcome. So congratulations on receiving a grant from the Coastal Conservancy, and thank you for the work that you do. We are really excited to work with you and help fund your project. Next slide. Everything we're going to cover today is also outlined in our grantee manual that's found on our website under grants and resources for grantees. And Vanessa's going to do a quick demo at the end of the webinar to show you where those resources are found. Next slide. I'm going to start by talking about acquisition projects because they have a kind of different process than the rest of our grants.
Laura?
Yeah.
Can we check with everyone? Were you able to see the slides advance?
Here.
Okay, so sorry about that.
Let me change the settings.
Sorry, Laura. No problem. What's on the site? It wasn't advancing anywhere.
I'm just going to share the whole screen. Good?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thumbs up. Great.
Thumbs up. Good.
Back on track.
Back to acquisition
Thank you, Laura.
project. Yeah, that's great. All right, acquisition projects. So grantees with acquisition projects should first set up a time to speak with your Conservancy project manager to discuss the process for acquisition projects. But the general process is 1, to execute a grant agreement with the Coastal Conservancy, and then 2, to provide what we call the acquisition documents to the Conservancy for review. And there's a bunch of documents that you can see listed on the screen in the middle. I'm not going to read them all, but they include an appraisal report, preliminary title report, purchase and sale agreement, escrow instructions, and others. The Conservancy will draft the offer to dedicate and send that one to you for review and signature. And once all of these items have been finalized, you can then submit an invoice request letter to the Conservancy. And we have a template for this. And this should be done at least 20 business days before close of escrow to ensure proper processing time. And the check is mailed directly to escrow. Again, the most important point here is to set up a meeting with your Conservancy project manager to discuss all of this. And they will send you resources, including an acquisition checklist to help keep you organized. So that's all on acquisition projects. Are there any, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if anybody has an acquisition project out there.
Nothing here.
Nothing. Okay, great.
Actually, sorry, there's one. I think Lee Hadley, if you'd like to just unmute, go for it.
Hi,
Yeah,
thanks. What if
Sure.
we have an acquisition project that also has other funding? So it's a dual.
You mean from other agencies?
No, from through the Coastal Conservancy grant. The bulk of it is acquisition, but there's a little money for some stewardship too.
Oh, okay. You know, I'm not sure if you're going to do 2 agreements or how they're going to structure that. So unfortunately, I think it's probably better for you to talk to your manager about how to get
Perfect.
it done.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Sorry.
right,
Not
no worries.
sure. All right, moving on. So the process for all of our other projects is kind of outlined here on the screen. And we will move through all of these topics. This is kind of a high-level overview that gets you from start to finish. This graphic, yes, so the first step is a grant agreement, and the second step, which we will also go into, is what we call conditions precedent to starting work, which also includes developing a work program. And once these things are done, then you can start your work and then move on to submitting progress reports and invoicing and finishing your project. So the first, oh, and I should also say, if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat. Okay. So starting with the grant agreement, that is an agreement between your organization and us. And the Conservancy project manager will draft that for you. It's going to outline the terms and conditions of the grant, and you can review typical grant conditions in our grantee manual while your project manager is drafting your grant agreement. So please let them know if you have any questions, and make sure you read before you sign. The first step is to fill out and sign a standard 204 form, which provides the state your address, where reimbursement checks will be sent. And even if you've had a Conservancy contract grant before, you still need to fill out a new 204 form. When your project manager is drafting the grant agreement, it's important to discuss your project schedule with them, because they're going to be identifying 3 important dates that will be specified in your grant agreement. And you can extend the dates, but we prefer that you try to give yourself some flexibility now instead of trying to extend later. So the first date is the completion date, and that's the date when all work that you plan to bill the Conservancy for is complete, and you can't bill for any work that comes after the completion date. The next date is the final request for disbursement date, and that's the date when you submit your final report and final invoice. And generally, this date is set 1 month after the work is complete. The last is the termination date, and that's when the grant closes. It can be 3 months after the work completion date, but for construction projects, this date will be generally 20 years after the completion date, because we expect that all improvements will be in place and maintained for at least 20 years. Next slide. So now we're going to move on to conditions precedent. So you can't start your work until all of these documents here that are listed have been completed. And these are also detailed in your grant agreement. The first is a board resolution, and the resolution tells us that your governing body has agreed to enter into this agreement with the Conservancy and identified who is authorized to sign the grant agreement. There is a template online, but you may have your own version of this that you would like to use instead. Next is insurance. Insurance requirements may differ according to your grant, so check with your project manager. The requirements are also, of course, going to be listed in your grant agreement. For those who may be returning and have had a grant with us before, we have changed our insurance policies, and we now require $2 million in liability for construction projects and $1 million in liability for planning projects. And we also no longer need to be listed as a certificate holder. We just need proof of insurance. You may also need things like bonding and a lien release, depending on your project, if it's a construction project, but only if you contract with someone for more than $20,000. If you need specific insurance for this grant and it increases your premium, you can charge your Conservancy grant for the extra charge. Just make sure to talk to your project manager about this. And here's a list of common insurance minimums. We talked about general liability, but there are minimums for auto liability, workers' comp, watercraft liability if you need that. Most people don't. Course of construction, property insurance. This is all, of course, dependent on your grant. And just talk to your project manager or refer to your grant agreement to see what your insurance requirements are. I think that's, yeah. So we can, if there's any questions, we can take questions before we move on.
I don't see anyone in the chat, but if you do have a question, you can unmute yourself if you like right now. No.
What if your county is self-insured?
If your county is self-insured, I think that can work. I think, you can provide evidence for all of the, there's all these different types of insurance. So you're saying your county is self-insured for everything, or just general liability?
I believe it's general liability.
Yeah, I think that can work. You might have to show proof of that, talk to your project manager, but you will need to obtain the other insurance that's required as part of your grant.
Thanks.
If there are no other questions, I'll move us on to the work program. So the work program is a project roadmap that defines the tasks, deliverables, and project schedule, as well as the task level budget for the project. And it tells us how you'll complete the project. It might take a few drafts and reviews by your project manager. We have a template on our website, and when you open it up, you'll see instructions on how to fill it out. And you can see an example of that on this slide, where the orange is everything that you fill out. And this is a living document that can be modified. So if during the project something changes, you can contact your project manager and request a change and receive their approval for a work program update. So you'll fill in the project description first, which provides a concise, high-level summary of your project, stating its goals and what will be done to achieve them. It typically can be one paragraph, but for more complicated projects, you're welcome to have a longer project description. Use the description from the grant agreement or staff recommendation as a starting point for this summary. Next up is the scope of work. So you will define the scope of work by task, and you can use subtasks to help you stay organized. But when you build for activities, you'll just use the overall task. So common categories of tasks are project management or grant management, design, environmental review, permitting, implementation, monitoring, community engagement, tribal engagement, and so forth. You can work with your project manager to tailor the tasks to fit your project. And for each task, you'll also define deliverables, which are documents that you'll turn in to your project manager. Next, you will provide an overall schedule for the project by task. Here's an example which doesn't look like it's correct, but the example is correct in that work program template that we have. So you can't see, but you'll use the task number, task title, and deliverables from the scope of work above and provide an estimated start and completion date for each item. This table will then be copied to the progress report for you to track your deliverables, but we can talk more about that later. And like I said, there is an actual example of this in the work program template. Oh, there we go.
Yes, need another click.
It was a reveal.
The reveal.
Okay, so yeah, there you go. There's the example. And there's it filled out. Perfect. So next is the budget, which is critical for invoicing. This will be copied onto the request for disbursement, and a simple budget allows for flexibility. You don't need to fill out matching funds except for when they're required by your grant. And please work with your project manager on your budget. So the next section is budget details, where you'll list out things like food, equipment, and travel, and your project manager will use this to make sure that all costs and activities billed for align with your approved plan. So please note that all organizations that receive funding from the Conservancy are required to meet strict accounting standards. While rare, there's always the possibility of an audit, so it's the responsibility of all of our grantees to use the generally accepted accounting principles published by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. So now to discuss some of the budget details. For labor costs in the work program, you don't need to provide us information about hourly rates or the number of hours worked in the work program. However, you will need to keep that as backup documentation when you submit an invoice. For stipends, cash payment is allowed, but not things like gift cards or transit passes. So please check with your project manager early if you're planning to use stipends in your project. And indirect costs, we allow them, but they can't be more than 20% of your overall grant. So again, please check and make sure to work with your accountant to come up with an indirect rate that can be backed up in case of an audit. And lastly, for subcontractors, you will need to provide the name of a subcontractor and a description to your project manager for approval before you start working with that subcontractor. And now we'll move on to the plan for acknowledgement. And this is the last part of the work program. So the Conservancy would like to be acknowledged in physical acknowledgements such as signage and in communication materials that mention your project. It helps give us funding recognition to ensure that future funding is made available to our programs. And examples of that are things like signage or interpretive elements, social media posts, website announcements, press releases, program brochures, anything that mentions funding. Yeah, we'll take that. And we understand that the conditions precedent that we listed, like everything Laura talked about in this work program, can take a lot of time. So talk with your project manager about charging some staff time to your grant before your start work letter, and we can work with you to make that happen. Okay, so once you've done the grant agreement, conditions precedent, and work program, then you will get the start work letter. And this letter is also called a notice to proceed. And once all the conditions precedent to disbursement have been approved, your project manager will send you a start work letter or a notice to proceed. Once you've received this letter, you can begin work that will be billed to the grant. And take note of the date shown on the notice to proceed, and please do not invoice for any work prior to this date. Okay, so that was everything on the work program and start work. So do we have any questions about that? And again, we'll provide that work program template to you all.
I saw there was a hand from Craig. You had a question.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was just to encourage colleagues to do as you say with regards to, excuse me, the accounting practices, and just make
Craig,
sure you dot your I's. Can you hear me?
Could you repeat your question?
Oh, no, it's not a question. It's just a comment.
Sorry, we can't, on our end, it's cutting in and out. Maybe in the comment in the chat if you like. That might be helpful. All right, thank you. Okay, any more questions? All right.
All right, wait to see what Craig says.
All right. Okay. So now, so you started work, as Sheree had mentioned, and now you're wondering, how do you get paid? So in this section, we will go over progress reports and invoicing. Okay, so to get reimbursed for project expenses, you should invoice no less than quarterly, so every 3 months, and no more than monthly. So you may not invoice for work prior to that start date of the project, the date which is on the notice to proceed. So invoices consist of your progress report, a request for disbursement form or an RFD, and backup documentation that supports expenses that are listed on the request for disbursement form. All the documents should be combined into a single PDF and emailed to the email that's on the screen at invoice@scc.ca.gov, and also CC your project manager so they can review the documents. Those deliverables, as mentioned earlier, they will need to be sent directly to your project manager. Do not include those in your invoices. And just also a note for the future, invoices cannot cross over into a new fiscal year. So our fiscal calendar year runs from July 1 to June 30th. So you can bill up until June 30th. But for any work after that, your next invoice will need to start on July 1st. So in other words, you can't have one invoice that covers both June and July. For the progress report, so we do have a template for that and that you can use. It is found on our website and in the grantee manual. So in the progress report, you will provide updates per task during that billing period. You will discuss current status, the work that was completed, any challenges and successes. And we also love photos. So please send those photos and stories directly to your project manager as well. Okay, so this is our RFD form, the request for disbursement. So there are 2 pages to fill out. The first page, it's the cover page, and that summarizes the expenses from that billing period. And the second one breaks down each expense, which is on the right side. And we have this form in both PDF and Excel format. And again, this can be found on our website. So here's page 1 of the RFD. Again, this page summarizes all the expenses from that billing period. So you see the box at the top left, that is boxed in red, is your address. That must match the address that is listed on the STD 204 form, or it's the payee data record form. This is the address where checks will be sent to. And your project manager will send this to you soon if they haven't already. If you'd like checks mailed to a different address, like a PO box, you would need to fill out an STD 205 form in addition to that STD 204. I'm sorry, STD 205 and then STD 204. There you go. And then you could ask your Conservancy project manager about that form if you'd like to do that. The task number and name and budget must match the approved work program. If task 1 is project management, the left side should say task 1 and project management. Task budget also includes the allotted amount for that task. There's a cost incurred this period is the amount expended. There's the total cost to date. And finally, the remaining balance for each task. So in terms of our withholding, so on the screen it says we will withhold 5%. However, we are in the process of changing that policy. So instead of withholding 5% of each invoice, we will instead withhold only the final $100,000 or 5% of the granted funds, whichever is less. This will be returned to you in your final invoice at the end of your grant. The RFD form and the grantee manual are in the process of being updated to reflect this change. So for those of you that have a current grant with us, you may require an amendment to your existing grant agreements. So you are also welcome to use this new policy, but the next steps will need to be figured out on a case-by-case basis. So this is page 2 of the RFD. Again, further breaking down the expenses from your page 1. All expenses require you to submit backup documentation except labor. The first section, which is listed as A at the top, is your direct costs. B is labor, so you would list each title, the hourly rate, the number of hours worked, and the task number. So you do not need to submit timesheets. However, please keep them, in the case of an audit. Section C is your indirect cost. So the indirect cost percentage must match the indirect cost rate listed in the work program. And finally, you have section D, which is your subcontractors. So you'll list the company name, the invoice number, the amount, and attach their invoice as backup documentation. And I think that's it. Next slide, please. So here we have some examples of some backup document examples. Just please note that you must include paid receipts for materials and supplies. Online purchases must show as shipped. Bank statements are not sufficient backup documentation, so please save all your receipts. Those are very important. In terms of travel, Travel reimbursement rates can be found on our website. To better support our grantees, we've recently updated our travel rates. If you've been awarded a grant with us before, be sure to check out those new rates. Right now, we reimburse personal vehicle mileage costs at 70 cents per mile, and this rate is still the state rate. The table here, it shows an example of how to document the mileage reimbursements. So here you would include the dates, the locations, the mileage, and total amount. Or if for travel, that can be reimbursed for gas with receipts and the cost of a rental car. Our lodging rates now match the federal rates, which is higher than the state rates. And this information can be found on our travel reimbursement rates found on our website. We've also updated, food is now $60 a day, that's capped, instead of various amounts per meal. And we can also pay for parking fees and tolls that are incurred during your project. And here are some examples of subcontractors. Subcontractors, again, they provide a service for the project. Here we have cultural resource specialists, design consultant, engineers, and they must include description of work completed and how much it costs. Let's see. We also do offer advancement of funds. Of like, what's next? But this you can inquire with your project manager if you're interested. So our grants are reimbursement based. So meaning grantees will need to incur the costs and then we will reimburse you. But we have a newish program. It's called our Advanced Funds Program. It was created in response to the needs of grantees and particularly smaller nonprofit organizations who are unable to cover upfront costs of a project. So as it could lead to significant financial burden. The Conservancy prioritizes recipient grantees serving disadvantaged, low income and under-resourced communities or organizations with modest reserves and potential cash flow problems. So please talk to your project manager if this is something that you may be interested in. Also, please note that grantees must deposit the advance payment in a federally insured interest-bearing account for which deposits, including interest and withdrawals, are to be tracked. The interest will need to be used for the project, again, tracked and documented. So finally, you've completed your project. So how do we close that out? Well, first of all, we love to stay involved in your project. For implementation projects such as like constructions, it typically is required to have your Conservancy project manager conduct a site visit at the end of the project to view the completed work. And so for other types of projects, please invite us to any other closing events such as a community event or press release. And then next would be submitting your final RFD and final report to your Conservancy project manager. The final invoice should include your final progress report and all deliverables outlined in your work program. But again, those deliverables will be submitted directly to your project manager, not included in your final progress report and invoice. In terms of this final this final RFD form, you'll also want to make sure that you check the box that you see that's circled in red to release your withholding. Okay, so we went through a lot of information today. We shared like various forms, templates, and examples. They can be found on our resources or grantees page, as well as our technical assistance page. A lot of different webinars and also guidance documents. We'll do a quick tour of that right now. So this is the landing page of the Coastal Conservancy. Oh, to share. Oh, wait, sorry. We're going to share. Sorry about that. I got too excited for the tour. So here we are. Starting the tour is our landing page of the State Coastal Conservancy website. So if we go to, there's a header grants, click that, and we go to, so there's technical assistance line or link, and then also we have resources for grantees. We click there. We have our grantee manual information, grant management guidance, information on using our logos for your plan for acknowledgement and so forth, and also invoicing. Thank you, Sheree. Invoicing information instructions, and also links to get those RFD instructions and the forms in PDF and also Excel sheets. And if we go up, thank you. If you click on the grantee manual here, again, this goes over all the information that we went over today. You can download it. And then also there's number 8, that gives you an index of forms and guidance and just sample documents for, your conditions precedent here. All right. So we have that there. We have a lot of information for you, and also, your project manager is here to also assist you. And we are done.
Well, we've made great time, I guess.
And so we can go into our Q&A portion of our webinar, our last one, actually. So also I see from Holly, you're unable to download the full grantee manual on 2 websites. For Holly, I haven't experienced that, but you could also check in with your project manager to see if that's.
I think I was having problems with it too. We'll look into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll look into that.
Difficulty downloading the manual, right?
Okay.
Could be the WordPress.
Yeah. Thanks for letting us know.
Thank you, Holly.
We're also seeing that error.
Okay, we just clicked on it as well, Holly, and we received the same thing right now. So we'll talk to our IT today, and hopefully they can get that as soon as possible.
I will also say that here, let me share this again. The part of the webpage that has those sections 1 through 8 broken down, I'm sharing it. This part 1 through 8, this is the full grantee manual, just broken down into sections. And I am able to open these up. So if you need to see it right now before we fix that full download issue, you can click on each individual section, and this is the whole grantee manual.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we bring up this screen with people?
If you do have any questions, you could also feel free to unmute as well.
All right. Right. Yeah. Maybe we have a lot of seasoned folks on the call today. Had grants with us before.
Well, it's good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah.
And congrats again.
Last chance. Any other questions? Did we get to Craig's question?
Craig had a comment about accounting practices, and making sure to have rigorous controls in place. He mentioned that he did get, or their organization got audited.
Oh, wow.
And on a straight acquisition from the coastal, or with SEC from 2000, and they were very glad that we had documentation on all aspects of the project beyond just escrow file, just such as the resolutions and other project docs to show to an auditor. So
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's really
course.
great.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. Nothing else? Okay. Record time.
Thank you.
So much for joining us. Happy Earth Day. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.